Formerly fat Mikey Pompeo of the Sopranos shocked the world by dropping out of the American presidential race. After much thought and prayer, Susan, whoever she is, and I have decided that now is not my time. All that keto gone to waste because Pompeo practically wasted away in order to run for president. Now, why have I such animus towards him? Well, many reasons. He made it abundantly clear that he, in the United States of America, would make it impossible for the then Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, to be elected as Britain's Prime Minister. And I tend to disapprove of interfering in elections in other people's countries. But perhaps most importantly, the highly developed plan that Fat Mikey had made to literally murder Julian Assange on the streets of London, 100 yards from Harrods, the Wonder Store, filled with American tourists, some of whom would have been Mikey Pompeo's gunmen, who had the blueprint, the plans, the tools, and the absolute determination. If Julian Assange had walked out of that embassy building, as some were trying to persuade him to do, Pompeo was going to have him murdered in cold blood on the streets of London. So you'll understand that I am filled with ire, not just about the fact that he was even remotely credibly running for president, but that Donald Trump gave him that job in the first place. It's been an effortless rise for Pompeo, head of the CIA, where we lied, we cheated, we stole, as he himself told us, all the way to almost the top of the American political tree. More even than the high positions of Donald Trump and Joe Biden themselves, the rise of Mike Pompeo tells us everything about the dysfunctionality of America. 10 people were shot in a mass shooting at a teen birthday party. I think it was today, it might have been yesterday, it might be tomorrow. It's the worst mass shooting since the last one, and the worst mass shooting before the next one. We'll all soon be told. Nothing to see here. Move on. We were fixated, however, by Plastic Paddy Biden staggering around in the Emerald Isle. He spent very little time in what he called Northern Ireland, but he stayed long enough to push the British Prime Minister, whom he had earlier referred to as Rashid Sunak, out of the way to salute a random white guy in a fancy uniform. Don't think I'm exaggerating, that is literally what he did. He seemed to confuse the British Prime Minister with either the guy that was going to carry his luggage or shine his shoes, or in any case, of absolutely zero importance in the so-called special relationship. He pushed them aside to salute a guy who was probably the commissioner of the local version of Harrods department store, certainly no one of any significance, whose name and face will remain anonymous, except as the guy for whom the British Prime Minister was pushed aside. Mind you, he is a diminutive runt. It's difficult to make eye contact with him. You have to look down in order to do so. Maybe that's what confused poor old confused Joe. But he spent little time there and contributed nothing to the breaking of the logjam either between Britain and the European Union over the north of Ireland, or for the overarching purpose, you would have thought, for a man wearing a shamrock on his sleeve and with a leprechaun on his shoulder. No, that was Rishi Sunak. He did nothing to help promote the case for the reunification of Ireland. And as for all those Irish Republicans, they shall be nameless, some of them for many decades, friends and comrades of mine, who lined up to grin into the camera and welcome home Joe Biden, I say you should be embarrassed to have done so. Joe Biden is the killer of Cubans. Remember Cuba, Jerry? Joe Biden is the killer of Iraqis, the biggest mouthpiece, megaphone for the invasion and occupation of Iraq. Remember the Iraqis? Jerry? He is the biggest supporter of Barack Obama's destruction of the Libyan Republic and the sodomy and murder of Colonel Gaddafi. Remember Colonel Gaddafi, Jerry? He is the man who has presided over the growth of a small nation of black African Americans in prison as a result of the penal policies that he almost alone pioneered in his long years in the Senate. There are 25% of the world's prisoners in the United States of America, a country with less than 5% of the world's population, and a grossly disproportionate number of those are black prisoners. Remember, black people, Jerry? Joe Biden is Israel's greatest supporter in the United States Senate and now in the White House. He therefore has the blood of generations of Palestinian people on his hand. Remember the Palestinian people, Jerry? Remember them? He's the man who has presided over the United States' involvement in the murderous war against Yemen. Remember the Yemenis, Jerry? He is the man that cheered on the invasion and destruction of Syria. Remember the Syrians? Jerry, I could go on, but I don't think I have been too harsh. Joe Biden is not just a clown. He is a dangerous clown, a man with blood on his hands. To meet him may be inescapable. To grin for selfies with him is inexcusable. Now the war drags on, and Easter made no difference, as Orthodox churches burned literally to the ground in western Ukraine, as priests were shackled and strapped with direction finders on their legs so that they could not move beyond the purview of President Zelensky. As churches were declared closed down, the people in the east were celebrating Easter. In Donetsk, they went to the beautiful cathedral there, in which I have myself prayed. But last night, as the service was underway to celebrate Easter, Zelensky fired shells into the cathedral, wounding many and murdering a young woman who turned out to be a pregnant young woman, 2 for the price of 1 Zelensky. Nobody should be surprised about it. The man is a thief, according to Seymour Hersh, apart from all the other things that he might be. How so? Seymour Hersh explained in detail. The United States gave $1 billion to the Ukrainian regime to help them through the cold winter by buying fuel. But instead of buying non-Russian fuel, which, according to the sanctions, they were bound to do, Zelensky bought on the black market cheaper Russian diesel and skimmed $400 million for himself and his comprador to make hay with, to buy mansions with, to prepare for the day when they are no longer required to be cold potatoes in Kiev, when they can luxuriate on the beach in Florida or on the beach in Tel Aviv. Take your pick. The United States has said nothing about this. Seymour Hersh, the Pulitzer Prize winner journalist who revealed the truth about the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines, is the man who broke the story of Abu Ghraib prison, who broke the story about the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. No journalist could be of greater note alive in the world today, but the United States media has completely ignored a story about the grand larceny of American taxpayers' money. The United States media is more concerned about hush money to Stormy Daniels than about the slush money to Vladimir Zelensky. We'll be talking to the one and only Jimmy Dore about this and other American stories in just a few minutes' time. But I noted that the Chinese defense minister was in the Kremlin with President Putin just hours ago. The Chinese defense minister may or may not have been there to coordinate actions with the Russian government. He may or may not have been there to discuss Taiwan. Certainly, the Washington Post today believes that it is the latter. They say that they picked up signs that China is about to invade Taiwan and take the reunification of their own country back into their own hands. Now, they would be fully entitled to do so, and they may indeed well do so. And certainly the policies of Western countries, particularly the United States, are making much more likely that a military action will be taken before Taiwan becomes transformed into a poison pill. And as I've said here before, if I was running China, Taiwan would already be back in the unified motherland. But I'm not running China. And the Chinese are famously patient and circumspect. And so to me, it is unlikely that they are about to invade Taiwan. And so I consider the Washington Post disinformation to be merely that, further cover for the powers that want to build up more and more military bases and nuclear hardware around China in order to intimidate it, in order to divide and conquer it. I don't believe that that will succeed either. But I am absolutely persuaded that we are in the grips of a major disinformation psyops against China. Russia, of course, that psyops is now a hot war in which both the British secret SAS Special Forces Unit are, without parliamentary knowledge or approval, actually in Ukraine. And the number of dead Americans coming back from Ukraine tells you just how many mercenaries or maybe volunteers from the United States Armed Services are in Ukraine. We know that the Russian missile attack on Kinzhal killed 140 NATO officers in a bunker deep under the ground. So that psyops is now a hot war. But the psyops against China is now reaching its apogee. Every fake news story that can be adduced to induce a war psychosis of the inevitability of war with China is now underway, deeply underway, profoundly influencing the public opinion landscape, they hope, in Western countries. It's certainly working in America, and I fear it's working also in Britain. Nobody, for example, reported the fact that the Dalai Lama was caught on camera French kissing a little boy and asking him into a microphone if the little boy would like to lick his tongue. If a Chinese leader had done this, it would, of course, have been the #1 item on the news. But it wasn't on the news at all in Western countries. Why not? Because the Dalai Lama is a key actor in the attempt to surround China with casus belli. Tibet, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the Falun Gong, the so-called Muslim question, the Paracel Islands, the South China Sea, the Taiwan Straits, a hellish orchestra of issues that can be called in by the conductor at any time of his pleasing. The Dalai Lama disappearing story, though, was as nothing compared to the disappearing story of Russian disinformation in the leaked documents from the Pentagon. I want to leave you with this thought because I have not seen it written down anywhere or heard it said anywhere in the mainstream media. Every single state-funded, state-affiliated Western media outlet, in print and on air, said that the leaked Pentagon documents were either faked or partly faked or had been altered by Russian disinformation factories with numbers swapped, numbers of Russian dead swapped for Ukrainian dead and vice versa. And yet the very same media outlets are now telling us a 28-year-old boy, Teixeira, actually leaked these documents, stole them from the Pentagon, gravely damaged America and its allies and the war effort in Ukraine by putting truthful documents into the public domain. Well, both of these can't be true, can they? If the Russians altered them, how can they be the documents that Teixeira leaked? If Teixeira leaked them, he must have leaked them before any Russians or Chinese got the chance to alter them. And yet not one embarrassed apology for yet another fake news offensive from the Western media that told us to disregard these documents. Disregard them and at the same time suppress them. That's why you haven't read hardly any of them, because the Western media agreed to the Pentagon demand that they should be suppressed, even though they had been faked, even though they had been stolen and distributed by one of the United States' own National Guardsmen, aged 21. How to look 5 different ways at once without even having to explain it. It is an extraordinary gymnastic feat, but nothing like the mental entertainment gymnastics you are about to experience when I welcome the one and only genius Jimmy Dore onto the show right after this short break.